to the sponsors. The obligatory slide, but it's real. And we'll start with me. My 3 favorite things in the world. The Green Bay Packers. That face mask there is a part of brewery that I'm a member owner of. And the bird on the bottom is a bald eagle, so I save bald eagles. A little context to that is at the start of the pandemic, the University of Minnesota Raptor Center, they work with owls, bald eagles, and other raptors, and they lost all of their revenue as soon as the pandemic hit because they had school-age children coming in doing tours. So I learned a lot, and some of these slides are built based on troubleshooting that was done remotely with the university, trying to figure out how to bring that remote experience. Teams Rooms, Teams Client, a handful of other things. So, and my wife is here, so the obligatory 3rd bullet. I've been blissfully married for 1.5 years. All right. With that, brief agenda, prereqs, kind of what's the right prereq to be in this session. This isn't really an introductory, but it's also not a super deep dive. It's intended to be conversational and get some feedback from the field, as well as just my experience in troubleshooting, how to kind of expedite that process and get things fixed. What's new in Teams Rooms? There's a boatload of stuff, and Richard is going to tell me one of them now. Okay. Some log file analysis. Got some good feedback. There's a bit.ly link that I'll throw out there. Just as far as what are all the log files and what they mean and what do they do in Teams Rooms, that it's helpful to be able to cut through the 2,000 to 3,000 log files that you download and figure out which ones are relevant. And then some cool new tools. Some of them are the same from previous sessions. Some of them are new, just based on experience and kind of this remote troubleshooting scenario. All right, so prereqs, experience, creating, deploying, troubleshooting, Microsoft Teams Rooms. I think most people in this room have probably have that experience. Teams Admin Center, PowerShell, remote PowerShell. The remote PowerShell is pretty useful in systematically scaling some of the troubleshooting tools that are intended to be for a specific device, but you can scale it if you want to scour your network. And then this one is identical to this session that I did 2 years ago, but it still very rarely gets done well, so that when troubleshooting Teams Rooms, we're going to try to empower you to do as much as you can here, but when it does need to get to, let's say, a Microsoft or an OEM in troubleshooting, having kind of these simple steps of when did the problem occur, what was the actual problem, a documented change control system, and then verifying supported configurations, kind of tying all those things together, that often takes a long time when troubleshooting Teams Rooms, when working with, again, the OEMs and Microsoft. All right, and Tressler is not in here, so I will commit on his behalf. I chatted with Graham and Tressler on there's a new kind of process we're creating rooms that I was unaware of, so that'll be a nice shout out to Tressler that I think he's doing that Friday. All right, what's new? Licensing, right? Lots of things between Basic and Pro. Windows 11 is pretty imminent, and then the rest of this stuff, we'll cover that in the future slides. All right, this is a terrible background with the gray, but you know, Teams Room Pro, Randy, I think you said, yeah, you just have to get it, because that's really what it is. But some of the stuff that you miss, right, is the configuration changes, and it's tough to if a customer or partner is calling in and you're remote, to confirm that, yeah, they actually did apply the right license. We'll go through some of the log file analysis so when customers do say, hey, yeah, you know, I need dual displays, or I can't seem to make configuration changes that are actually occurring, that I make in TAC and they're not showing on the device. We'll cover some of the details of the log files of that. But this is just the succinct list copied from docs. All right. This slide, as far as licensing, this shows 3 different license files, 3 different log files. And I guess I'll zoom in a little bit here. Let's see if I can figure this thing out. Oh, that's technology. Look at that. All right. There are 3 different files that cover the licenses in Microsoft Teams Rooms, actually showing what license is applied to a room. The first one is the Rigel app settings file, and that's in the folder structure that we'll discuss. The second one is the Skype room init. The Skype room init is super useful because it tells all of the configuration settings that are configured either in TAC or on the device itself, and you can confirm that they're actually applied at the time that the Teams room starts up. And then the last one is in the Teams diagnostic log, which is, again, in another folder. All 3 of these show that in this case, the device license information, in this case, the license is meeting room. In the other 2 log files, as it sits today, and sorry, I know this is super small, the license name is unknown. So we can tell that Microsoft is still kind of fleshing out the details of how licenses are applied in these various log files. But again, the point of this is you can find a lot of information in various logs, and I'll try to get you a succinct list to make it quick. And then on the right-hand side, these are all of the licenses that are actually checked in the application. It covers from GCC, GCC High, right? A bunch of different things, as well as you can see that they're transitioning from the meeting room to the standard meeting room, as well as the premium to Pro and Basic. Well, right, but there is some nuance there because GCC, you figure that's going to transition. You're going to have more than just two because some are going to apply to GCC and basic tenants. All right, this is the big one. Hopefully this isn't the one that you were talking about, Richard. The Windows 11? Okay, all right. So this is on the roadmap. So this is very imminent. It's coming out in May. And with operating system changes, as Randy mentioned in his session, there's a lot of nuance to operating system changes, a lot of QA, quality assurance that needs to be tested. This is very imminent, so it's looking appropriate for that May rollout to occur, and a bunch of MTRs will update in the near future. Along those lines, a call out, same thing that Randy said, don't manually update Windows devices to a newer version. You may see it presented, right, as we're figuring out the Windows 11 update path. The MTR application itself needs to be at a certain version, and then Windows Update should automatically offer and update that. We've seen occurrences of Windows 11 being offered in Windows Update, even if the application shouldn't necessarily allow it. So don't manually update. And then on the right-hand side, this is a specific error message from one of the event files that's listed at top that when customers have done some certain troubleshooting BIOS changes. They're configuring the MTRoWs, trying to fix one thing, and they break something else. This is where the Trusted Platform module has been disabled in many customers to resolve certain audio issues that occur between the Intel BIOS, right, and the drivers. After that is done, these devices won't upgrade to Windows 11, right? It'll say the TPM is enabled. Windows 11 will require that for the upgrade process. So that's just something to look out for that I would expect will probably hit the wild when customers start updating. But yeah, go ahead. As Randy said, don't build your own enterprise image, right? Use the OEM image that's provided, but then you can't really keep customers or lock customers out of BIOSes, realistic if they want to get in there. So there's some empirical data that you can use as far as this specific Skype or MTR ID that you can say, hey, this thing passed, and if it didn't pass, why didn't it pass, to expedite the troubleshooting process. All right. Lots of changes. We went from 2 or 3 different layouts, let's say 3 years ago, that an individual customer should select, to many different layouts types, multiple displays, resolution, and scaling. If you've looked at the docs lately, Microsoft removed the 1080p requirement list from most of the docs pages. So it's not explicitly called out that 4K is supported, but you can see in the logs that there's definitely an acceptance of 4K resolution. I don't know if anybody in this room, Richard, if that was the one thing, 4K support? Nothing, okay. All right. But the reality is the logs currently show that 4K will be supported. And that, don't know what the future brings, right? I don't have an NDA with Microsoft outside of my day job, but all of the logs indicate, right, that there is a move forward towards potential additional resolution supported. All right, and the last thing, Randy, I think you touched on this too, is the intelligent, right? IntelliFrame or intelligent cameras. Now there's this one room at the bottom that is now sending 4 different streams. Who's doing those 4 streams, right? Is it going to come from Microsoft, or is it going to come from the OEM, or both? And I don't have any log entries because that's still being fleshed out as far as how those are presented, either on the team side with IntelliFrame or with intelligent cameras that are done by the OEM. But these are just all things that are adding to, there's a lot of complexity. Going back to the first point of making sure to very clearly identify what's the issue that's occurring, when did it happen, so that we can review those logs and dig in pretty quickly. All right, TAC, I think everybody here knows TAC. This is the one bullet point, right? This is the place to go, right? To download the log files so that we can get to the point we can actually begin troubleshooting. And calling out the Pro licenses, right? The configuration settings that are different. I won't walk through all of these. You can see the deck, but right, this is the stuff that can be configured remotely that wasn't configurable remotely 2 years ago, right? You configure it through an XML file. But I will say, through experience, if you configure the settings in this, it's not instantaneous. And reviewing the log files, you can actually see when the change applies, as opposed to just kind of guessing, hey, can you try this? Can you try this 15 minutes from now? Can you reboot? That kind of stuff. So I think that's probably good there. All right, hardware troubleshooting. This is kind of the meat of the MTRoW session. List of things that we're troubleshooting with MTRoW. OEM devices, right? So Logi, Neat, Poly, many others that I'll forget to list. The driver versions. Microsoft has very explicit supported driver versions, right? The OEMs qualify with Microsoft Teams, and OEMs also present another way of potentially updating drivers, be it through the various Intel tools or the compute tools. But the reality is that the supported process, when certified Microsoft for everything that's used in the OS, that need to be adhered to be able to expedite support with Microsoft or the OEMs. Displays, we'll cover some tools on how to manage displays. Recently, about a month ago, there was a hardware manufacturer that makes computers and is also a fruit that their OES update to 13.3, when plugged into certain Microsoft Teams rooms, the OS crashed, right? Literally just blew every application that was running up and returned the system back to a login screen. So those monitors are two-facing. I've got dual monitors at the front of the display, but then also is also a monitor. All right, looking at the devices log, actually, I'll go back. So this is the list of the folder structure of all the Teams rooms files. Now we're covering just the one devices.txt file. That's pretty helpful when connecting to USB peripherals. And to short circuit all the stuff in here when troubleshooting, always focusing on the USB PID and the VID. So the VID is the vendor identifier. It tells you which manufacturer made it. And then the PID tells you what the actual device is. That will help us troubleshoot a boatload of stuff. So rather than going through a bunch of log files, right? If we can filter log files or comments using grep or whatever tools I want to use, I can see all the entries that are tied to this device in a chronology that makes sense to figure out, did things get disconnected or things not updated? All right, and what does that tie to? That ties to the Microsoft Update Catalog. Anybody in here know the layman's term for the Microsoft Update Catalog? It is Windows Update. So when people talk about Windows Update, this is kind of the centralized place, right, for drivers to pull down, and where all the OEMs and vendors publish their things through qualification process into the Microsoft Update Catalog, and then ultimately the end users or the MTR application itself or the Windows box itself will pull from the Microsoft Update Catalog. It'll be presented as Windows Update, and then ultimately certified and qualified devices will get updated. All right, what does that look like from an end user perspective? Let's say I have a problem with a device and I'm not sure if this driver version is the right one, or I want to test out a new driver version. I verified, right? I got my Rally Cam, I think it was a Rally Cam or Rally system. I verified that, yeah, this is the right package. I did a search for Logitech Rally. There were a load of responses given the iterations of Windows that are available. Supported hardware PIDs and VIDs, and ultimately, I have the ability to manually download that package from Windows Update. So if, let's say, I want to see that Microsoft may not have qualified something from MTR yet, but I want to test out a new driver version, and I'm trying to validate an old driver version, this is an easy way to be able to roll back. I'll stop this. I mean, this is the way that you can know exactly what version you're going to get, because we're trying to get to a supported version of drivers that Microsoft has qualified for Microsoft Teams rooms, because ultimately we have some kind of problem. And we need to get a baseline that we know we're in a supported configuration. This is the way for an IT admin to I won't say easily, to be able to confirm that they are getting the version that is expected, as opposed to let's say the latest. All right, some additional log analysis. These are all of the files that are downloaded. The Windows folder contains all of the event files that are on that box. There are probably 2,000 of them, but the reality of them, maybe only 20 of them are populated. I don't think I have it on here, but there's a kernel PNP log that tells you every time a device is plugged in or unplugged from a Microsoft Teams rooms. That's the event log that's looked for to say, yep, somebody plugged it in, or an end user was trying to blow up a Teams room because they were trying to just connect to the display and they accidentally plugged in something else. Really quick way of being able to figure out, yeah, I can see that something was disconnected or there was a problem. The Skype downloads, that's still used. Of course, there are Teams logs in the Skype downloads folder. There's just a bunch of JSON-based files that show licensing information, as well as some of the UI experience when Windows changed around. Generally, we're not going to be looking through those. That would be a Microsoft thing because it's tied to how the window process management works. But it's useful to know that it's there. And then the easiest log file to use here is the desktop API service. This log is what contains the entire chronology of events from a time that a Microsoft Teams room boots up through all the meetings that were attended, all the stuff that was done in the meeting, to ultimately to when it reboots the next night. This desktop API service.txt is by far the most useful log that takes maybe 90% of the stuff in the other logs and puts it in one spot in a chronology. Any comments on this? Or is this boring as heck? I see it one picture. Thank you for taking a picture. But yeah. Yeah. So if you think about, we were talking about this, like Azure Monitor, right? It used to be OMS and then Azure Log Analytics and now Azure Monitor. What we're kind of seeing in the Pro Portal is pulling from some of these log files and correlating the data, figure out, hey, this room had these issues. I don't know all of the log files that they're using, but based on how it's presented, it looks very much like they're pulling this data from this. As well as adding on the telemetry that's sent from the Teams rooms to say, hey, we have a reasonable correlation here that we think this is what your problem is. Do you want us to fix it for you?
Make sure you yell at Jamie Stark for that.
Yell at Jamie Stark for that, yeah. All right. Cool tools. These are tools that are freely downloadable and very useful for troubleshooting and short-circuiting this log file process, because I realize it's pretty dry to look through log files and screenshots of log files and maybe even TAC. But these cool tools, use them on a daily basis to troubleshoot. So monitor info view, going back to the display changes, there are a boatload of display changes. Microsoft may or may not be supporting 4K cameras or displays, but the log files generally infer that. This reads from the HDMI information from the Windows 10 or soon to be 11 compute device and copies all of that EDID information. EDID is how a display communicates with a computer and all that exchange that occurs. I can see that I've got my monitor serial number. I can tell if CEC, right, turning displays on and off, is enabled. Maximum resolutions. So if we saw 4K in the mix when 4K wasn't supported, we could potentially identify as well that the monitor itself was negotiating at 4K and then ask the customer, please use the XML and please downscale to set it to 1080p. We also use this tool to troubleshoot the fruitware problem by connecting a Windows box to the MTR's HDMI ingest. We pulled the information from this, kind of did a comparison between different vendors, and that's how we were able to pinpoint where the root cause of the problem was how the fruitware was interpreting the information. I don't want to get sued, so we'll just leave it at that. All right, USB view. This is actually provided in the Windows SDK. The last session I had used a third-party tool that was called basically the exact same thing. This one is way nicer. It's provided by Microsoft. We have customers that plug things in, and we'll ask them, hey, did you follow the standard cabling diagram? And they, of course, will say, yes, we absolutely followed it. And in the meanwhile, they have 3 USB extenders, a USB hub, some InnoGenie switcher in between, and it's really hard to see that. We can't really see that in the logs. We just see, hey, something's disconnected or something's not working right. This USB view gives you the entire USB hierarchy in a single snapshot, and it takes about 5 seconds to run. So great way of identifying what devices are connected to Teams rooms on Windows, which ports are it connected to. I can see if there are other USB hubs that somebody may have put in the mix. And then also, I can also see USB 1, 2, and 3 is supported. So as 4K becomes more prevalent and customers will expect it, USB 2.0 supports 1080p. As customers aren't getting 4K. If it's running USB 2.0, they're not going to get 4K. As transition to 4K, with USB 3.0, right, that'll be required. And this is a real quick way of saying, hey, I know that my device is running at USB 1, 2, or 3. Anybody used this tool before? Yeah.
Is the win there that you can go back a second? Is the win there that you can export that and then look at it on a different
Yeah, you could export it. You could schedule it to export. Right, there's an executable. There's a standalone command line executable that run it as a scheduled task, and then I can get a chronology over time. I can see what did they plug in, what didn't, right? What changes were made. So a snapshot super helpful, but over time really nice for change management.
The last time I saw that was with a customer that had multiple cameras on MTRoW. They're using an older compute with a single exposed USB into some
Something.
random thing, and they're trying to figure out why the back of the room camera didn't work, and it was a perfect tool.
Yeah. All right, and the last one before Richard's 25 freaking questions. MTR Info, I will update it. It actually says Logi MTR Info today, so I've got to update it to be vendor agnostic. But this is a tool that I have scheduled on maybe a dozen MTRs every night that gives all the computer information. It outputs an HTML report, all the computer information, right? BIOS version, the Windows info, so we know exactly what Windows builds and versions, activation, the MTR. I should need to change that to MTR, don't I? The MTR version, vendor-specific stuff, right? You can change what you're searching for depending on what vendor you're looking for, as well as when all of the recent hotfixes were applied. In addition to two other things, which are the driver info. Again, this list, I don't have all of them. There are like 200 drivers on average on a Windows box, but it lists every version of driver, or every driver that's on the box, as well as the version and where it essentially where it came from on Windows Update, as well as all the services that are running. So going back to you, Randy, I'll leverage what you said. Hey, don't install antivirus. Typically, antivirus will install some kind of service as well. This is a nice snapshot to be able to run. And I generally schedule this at midnight, right before the MTR reboot, and then at like 4 or 5 a.m., because that way I can see when exactly were changes made. Were they changed during the scheduled reboot, or were they potentially changed by a customer or an end user? So this, I'll get the link, but that'll get you an easy way to export MTR data. And then Richard will write a script for me to help get it into some kind of database so we can report on it. Thank you. All right, I have 37 minutes left. I'm very respectful of individuals' times. Yeah, I'd love to, if there are any comments, questions, problems that you're seeing in the field that would be worth. I've got some log files available too, but that we could certainly dig in a little more detail. Yes?
We just turned on Pro, and it's very noisy. It says things like alerts for USB drain or something like that.
I got that same alert. It goes away after like 2 days.
It itself every day, but I don't want to do the alerts, or I don't know what's going on with the other stuff. What is it? What can I do to fix it? Like, what's going on?
That is one of the questions that Richard must have asked you to ask, because I do not know USB drain. I'm not familiar with that. It could be selective suspend. I don't.
It literally went away. Like it self-diagnosed, and then within 48 hours
It's like you get the alert, and it's working on it. That's like solved, and the next day it comes back. Why is it doing this?
It does it on Windows and Android documentation where you can suppress those events.
Got it. And it's kind of two prong there. One is the suppression of the alerts, because do we care about them? I don't know. But then what's the root cause of the problem? And power drain typically ties me to selective suspend or some kind of chipset and how much power do I provide the bus.
It actually correlates with the screen going off and it coming back on again.
Got it.
Yeah, and on the two that I see it on, they're actually touch screens as well.
Wow.
One's Android, one's Windows.
And are the displays going off or? Well, kind of curious.
They're
Interesting. With a controller attached, is it the touch just UI? Yep. Yeah.
You were talking about EDID and like the 4K support and all that.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of like consumer-based TVs that are talking 4K. It wakes up the MTR and it's got a black screen. The touch controller is the only thing they can do with reboot. And so I've seen a lot of like even Microsoft documentation has like EDID emulators and controllers and things like that. Hopefully with the 4K coming out, maybe that won't be needed anymore. Any thoughts on that?
I'm very familiar with this. Yeah, so that big issue is tied to 11th gen Intel chipsets, and I think it's the Iris graphics driver. Microsoft's official stance, like you said, they classify it as a consumer display. Don't use consumer displays even if I've got a commercial display. What they really mean is don't rip away the display. Don't physically allow the display to get disconnected, meaning power off, while the MTR is running. The issue is resolved with Windows 11. Woohoo! Right? There was kind of a combination of weakness in code on the MTR side, combined with the way that Intel has a virtual graphics driver that even if you unplug a display, Intel still presents the operating system, hey, there's still something connected here. And that when the displays are reconnected, they'll cause a race condition that causes the app to blow up and essentially hang. So that's definitely resolved. It's resolved in Windows 11. The official workaround is to use the edminder, and the unsupported workaround is to use a registry file to disable the virtual monitor and the graphics chipset that I take beer or bourbon. Yeah. The completely unsupported registry workaround disables the virtual monitor in the Iris chipset. Whether or not, there's also a way to undo it, right? There's just a backup registry key that you blow away the things that says disable the virtual monitor in the Iris chipset. I don't know if it'll go away with Windows 11. In emergency scenarios, that may be something that is valid because your customers are going to yell at you for it. Why isn't this working? And they may not be able to wait until Windows 11. So then it's either use an emergency experimental unsupported registry hack or an edminder. Yeah.
So I know the 4.16 release came out March 24th.
Yeah, 4.16.40. Yep.
And the new user experience isn't turned on by default. You have to do the XML file changing.
Yep.
Say new user experience true. So I was all excited about that. Turned it on. Most of our systems were fine, and then the customer system, of course, ordered. The next day came up with a black screen with a little tiny white arrow. I was curious if you or anybody else had seen that.
I haven't seen that. I thought you were going to say the custom background disappeared.
No. So I mean, it looked great. They loved the interface. They were actually starting to update their change management training documents. But then every day, it came up with this black screen with a little white arrow. I haven't heard many other people have that issue.
I've been testing the new UI since just before ISE, February time. I've never seen that, unfortunately.
And I reverted it, and then the MTR was fine. Went back.
The UI changed. You just turned off the UI, the XML. Yeah. I hadn't seen that.
Is it very specifically on the touch console or the front of the display? Where did you see the black screen?
Touch console.
And is this an actual touch console or your
It's
MTR?
It shows on the.
Was the touch console still responsive? Could you tell when you touched it that it had some kind of response?
No response. I had to go back and do a PowerShell reboot or physical.
Yeah. It would be helpful there to attach physical keyboard, right? From the Teams Admin Center or locally?
I went to the Pro portal and said get logs.
Yeah. In those scenarios, it's helpful to attach a keyboard and press the Windows key 5 times to see if the application itself is hung or not, and if you can get into that admin user, or if that pressing the Windows key 5 times isn't responsive, that would be helpful. It's a kind of A/B triage test.
Because I had something similar to that once, and it was the connection wasn't slightly tight enough in the back that the console fixed it all. But it would go to sleep, would come back, black screen, looked like the thing was frozen. It was just the connection just wasn't tight. It was because when it was pinned down by the puck, it kind of slightly pulled it out.
Yeah. That's terrible to troubleshoot. Yeah.
Awful. I have so many cases open in Tab on, and they're like, I'm telling you, it doesn't work.
Yeah, my problem was exactly what Brian just described, because I had my tab connected to my MTRoW using a little USB Ethernet.
Yep.
Thing.
Cat5e. Yep.
Yeah. The nature of my lab, it was physically connected, it had power, but it was not fully seated.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what shows up too in that USB device scenario. Does it show something different, right, as far as the power draw or the protocol it's negotiated? Right, right, yeah. Well, the good thing is Richard hasn't said anything yet, so I am good at returning 30 minutes to people's days, right? If they're, go ahead, Richard.
Oh, I was just curious, with today's announcement of a rebrand of Microsoft, what impact will that have with the rebranding that they announced today?
Yes. I am not aware of the rebrand announcement.
What? You haven't been just following all day?
I have been, yes, I've been following. But you can give a summary to the group here.
Well, they're changing their domain to for Teams now. This is way
So you heard it here first. Teams.cloud.microsoft in my session. That's going to be the Teams rebrand. Okay, there we go. I got
Admin.teams.cloud.microsoft.
right. Yeah.
So good news, bad news. Good
I
news
read- I
is
read
it's
that.
not Viva. Bad news is it's something stupid.
Is that part of the antitrust splitting Teams away from Windows?
I don't know.
Just reiterating, it's in the cloud.
Right. It's really a cloud service.
There.
They're selling Teams off to
Will they still have Skype for Business integration? Huh. Yeah. Well, that's it. This is a great group. Thanks for the conversation, and happy to chat through any other troubleshooting stuff or dig in deep one-on-one or as a group.